a lot quicker than they used to by far. You know, like they used to put the metal down, they might leave it there for up to a week. So, of course, people would drive through and speed through it. Stones would flick up everywhere and get carted halfway down, the road, past the roadworks. Now I'm seeing personally that they are laying that metal, and within hours they're sweeping it off the road again. Now, obviously, a lot of the time that metal's not stuck. It's not the tar hasn't got hard yet. And when we get people, like I was coming back from Cambridge the other night, fresh roadworks on the way up to Cambridge, only a matter of hours later coming back, and we've got people going through those roadworks and are being swept within that 2 hours. So they'd put the metal down. They were literally putting the tar down when I drove through. Metal on top of it straight away. Within 2 hours, I was coming back through. They had actually swept that loose metal off, what was loose, but there were cars still going through there, hitting that in trucks, I might add, doing 80, 90 Ks in a 50k or in a 30k area.
All right. Well, you and I helped, Sean. I thought it was a crisis, but it turns out not to be.
Well, I know everyone is complaining about it, and hey, like I say, I'd be the first one to say, hey, good on the guys, because they're drawing up business for us. But on the flip side of it, I think that, to be perfectly honest, I think they're actually doing a really good job of actually clearing the stones off a lot quicker, than what they used to. So,
good on you, Sean. Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us. Sean Evans there, who is from the Gateway Glass Store in Thames and Whitianga.
I think everyone should give Sean some business, actually, if they're ever going through near one of his shops.
Isn't he?
With honesty like that,
honest.
You're going to get a good deal.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I don't know, do you, where to take the conversation next? Have you ever driven on
I mean, I guess that there's lots of open roads down in Coromandel, isn't there? And so you get a lot more metal roads and you have more windscreens, but they don't have any traffic jams. We have that in Auckland. So
I'd just like to dive into the journalistic ethics of, was it RNZ who did this story? How they've developed this into a big news story. Was any research done?
I will tell you that there's been a large response to water metering, so maybe we can do a follow-up on that. But for the meantime, Thomas Pryor and Nicky Bazan, thank you very much for being with us on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman.
Thank you.
Back tomorrow at 3:45. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo e Rangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, where did an Air New Zealand crew member catch COVID-19? Genome sequencing will hopefully hold the answer. So what exactly can it tell us and how accurate is it? We talked to one of the ESR scientists solving mysteries. Pen pals, the Reserve Bank Governor and Finance Minister, on the same page when it comes to house prices. And as policy wonks and politicians hammer out solutions for skyrocketing house prices, we head to an auction. The elephants at Auckland Zoo are packing their trunks and heading off. A stampede of tourists to Queensland post-COVID pushes prices up 300%. And the dark side of Black Friday sales. Buyer beware.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. Urgent genome sequencing is underway to help scientists determine where an Air New Zealand crew member got infected. The person first tested positive for COVID-19 in Shanghai and is now in quarantine at the Jet Park Hotel in Auckland. ESR in Wellington is working quickly to complete sequencing and will compare it to other strains on the database. Dr. Joep de Ligt says ESR has an almost complete picture of all COVID cases in New Zealand.
But there's still the very small possibility that it is something that we haven't picked up yet in the community. As I say, that is a small possibility because since that there is good testing in New Zealand and we have a near complete picture.
Dr. Joep de Ligt, you can hear the full interview on Checkpoint shortly. The head of Oranga Tamariki has rejected speculation that she is resigning amid claims she was set to leave. Gráinne Moss appeared at the Waitangi Tribunal urgent inquiry regarding the disproportionate taking of Maori babies from their whānau. Mani Domlop reports.
Ms Moss says she has no idea where the rumours about her resignation came from, but she confirmed that she is staying at the ministry, which has been under intense scrutiny. She says she still has work to do and has had positive conversations with the Children's Minister, Calvin Davis, despite him being unclear about whether he has confidence in her. Ms Moss also appeared in front of the Waitangi Tribunal today, making concessions, including admitting structural racism has had adverse impacts on Tamariki Maori. Ko Mani Dunlop tēnei.
A soldier based at the Wellington military camp in Manawatu has been charged with spying and a raft of other charges. The Defence Force has advised the man, who has name suppression, will face 17 charges at a court-martial. Ruth Hill reports.
The charges, some of which are alternative or backup charges, include 4 of espionage, 2 of attempted espionage, 2 of possession of an objectionable publication, and 3 of accessing a computer system for a dishonest purpose. A soldier was arrested at Wellington in December amid suspicion of being part of a far-right extremist group. The self-styled militant Christian Brotherhood, Wagas Christi, had claimed online the arrested soldier was a member. The Defence Force says as the matter is now before the court, it can make no further comment. Ko Ruth Hill tēnei.
The Greens argue the public expects the government to get the housing crisis under control, even if it means breaking its promise not to introduce a new tax. The party has long argued that major tax reform is needed so that the profit made from selling houses is taxed in the same way wages are. But Labour has committed to not making any changes to the tax system, other than what it campaigned on. The Green Party's finance spokesperson Julianne Genter was asked whether Labour really had a mandate for change given that promise.
They didn't have a mandate to close the border until we had a pandemic. We're in the middle of a crisis, and it's probably the expectation of the New Zealand public that the government will take the action that's needed to stop runaway house prices.
Julianne Genter. The Mayor of New Plymouth is warning residents to steer clear of contaminated beaches, rivers and streams after heavy rain hit the city today. About 100 millimetres fell inside a 24-hour period, overwhelming several sewage pump stations, flooding roads and closing some schools early. Neil Holdham says the city's emergency response team has been mobilised and public health warning signs have gone up at contaminated beaches, streams and rivers.
Essentially, we've got sewage in the waterways in those areas. We just need people to stay out of the water for a few days because there's a risk to public health.
Neil Holdham says the city's wastewater treatment plant is working a full capacity but coping well. Met Service says most of the wet and wild weather that battered much of the North Island today has passed, but there is still a risk of a return. It's 5:04. The New Zealand and West Indies cricketers will discuss tomorrow what action they might take in support of the Black Lives Matter movement ahead of the T20 Test Series. The Black Caps open their international domestic season with a T20 match against the Windies at Eden Park on Friday night. When the Windies toured England earlier this year, they wore Black Lives Matter logos on their shirts, and the two teams knelt before play to show support for the anti-racism movement. Black Caps coach Gary Stead says they need to find out what the Windies want to do here.
It's part of our education and understanding of their thoughts, but we also, in New Zealand, the New Zealand Human Rights Commission as well, around give nothing to racism. So we're sort of pairing up with them in terms of our own message around that and making sure that we have our own stance on those things.
Meanwhile, the Black Caps have been forced to make late changes to their squad for the first Test match, which immediately follows the 2020 series with an all-rounder Colin de Grandhomme and left-arm spinner Ajax Prezell ruled out through injury. They've been replaced by Daryl Mitchell and Mitchell Santner. January's Australian Open is set to be delayed by a week or more as negotiations between organisers, the tennis tours and the Victorian state government over health measures continue. Chelsea have booked their place in the last 16 of football's European Champions League after a 2-1 win over French club Rennes. Manchester United beat Turkish side Başakşehir 4-1. That's the news.
a runaway housing market.
We are in a situation now where off the back of a recession we have a house price boom. That's pretty unusual.
Advice from an economist.
Having a government tell a fiercely independent central bank what to do, I think, is stepping onto dangerous ground.
And the public weighs in.
What about socialism? Is it that bad a thing? I don't think so. Look after the people, create affordable housing, make sure everyone can live comfortable lives.
Keeping you up to date in your home. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A low and associated fronts approaching from the Tasman Sea affects the North Island and Upper South Island. Warnings and watches are in force for heavy rain. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain or showers, thunderstorms and downpours are possible today. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery and Taupo. For the remainder of the North Island, periods of rain tonight. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery from Manawatu and the Taradua district northwards. Buller, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago. Patchy rain, more widespread in Nelson and Marlborough with some heavy falls, easing to scattered showers in the morning. Westland, Fiordland, the remainder of Otago and Southland mainly fine. High cloud increasing tomorrow and scattered rain developing at night. Chatham Islands mainly fine, rain developing overnight tomorrow. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Urgent genome sequencing in the case of an Air New Zealand crew member with COVID could provide more clues to where they got infected. The person tested positive during routine screening in China and was flown home yesterday on a freight flight to avoid contact with other passengers. The crew member and 7 of their close contacts are now in quarantine at Auckland's Jet Park Hotel, and health officials have been investigating and tracing the case as if it were a confirmed community case in New Zealand. Public Health issued a list of Auckland locations visited by the crew member shortly before they flew to China. ESR's racing to complete the genome sequence for this case and will compare it to others on a database. I asked ESR scientist Yup Delect if there's no match with another New Zealand case, does that mean the infection was caught overseas?
We have an almost complete picture of everything that is around in the country, but there's still the very small possibility that it is something that we haven't picked up yet in the community. As I say, that is a small possibility since that there is good testing in New Zealand and we have a near complete picture, but it's something that we cannot exclude as a possibility.
How complete is that picture when it comes to genome sequencing? I mean, what percentage of all COVID cases in New Zealand would have been genome sequenced?
Yeah, so overall, over the complete overview of cases, there would be about an 80% coverage. And in terms of the last couple of months, that is 90% complete. And that has to do with there's a couple of cases where we sometimes don't have enough RNA to actually get a complete genome out, but it is almost as complete as we can have it.
So when you talk about RNA, does that mean that the sample size you've taken does not have sufficient material in it to give you a complete sequence?
Yes, and that could be because the person was infected historically and doesn't have a lot of virus in their body anymore. That's what most typically happens, or that for some reason there's just not a lot of RNA in the sample.
So what's realistic in terms of a goal in sequencing? So some you will never be able to sequence properly because of that, but what are you working towards?
So we're trying to stay above that 90% line. We will try to sequence any sample just to be sure that we can get as close to that mark as possible. But if you have that sort of level of coverage, then you can start to make some conclusions about your missing data. And the other thing is what is promising is that if it is indeed those historic cases, it's also less likely that they will lead to onward spread. So it's not as bad of a problem if you miss them.
So you must be information sharing then in order to match these sequences with ones that are taken overseas. So does the information go into some kind of central database or how does it work?
Yeah, so there is a global database that is called GISAID. where we upload our sequences and where we can then also download other sequences from other countries. So there's quite a good international effort where that sharing happens to help us with these types of investigations.
So the information you get from a genome sequence, what can it confidently tell you? What's its value?
So in this case, if we were to find a link to one of our New Zealand genomes that it is very similar to that tells us with quite some certainty that they are part of a same transmission chain, as we call it. So that means that in terms of investigations, we can start to look at how those two people might have interacted, and that probably is through an additional person, but that we can start looking for the missing links. If we wouldn't find a link to a New Zealand genome, we can then look at those international genomes. If it is very, very close to one of those international genomes, that makes it more likely that it is what we call a travel-related infection, where we might start to look more in detail at the airports or the airlines involved with the movements of a certain person.
Okay, so this is where we get to the nitty-gritty. I just want to interrupt briefly here. How sure can you be, by what percentage, that one case is connected to another?
So that really depends on what the genome yields. Some genomes are quite unique. Some of the ones that we have in New Zealand, because we have a quarantine system, they have not spread to anywhere else in the world. So if we find a mutation that is like that hasn't been seen anywhere else, that is quite certain. But if it is a sequence that is widespread across the globe, then it becomes less certain. So it really depends on the individual genome that we find, how certain or uncertain we can be.
So in the simplest of terms, can you just explain for us so we can kind of visualise this? What is a genome sequence?
So it's 30,000 A's, T's, C's, and G's in a row, and that is what the genome sequence looks like. So if you have a piece of paper, imagine that being full of those four letters and in quite a fine print. That's the genome sequence of the virus.
So that's the simple explanation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and if we want to abstract that even further, it's a bit like that every virus carries a book of instructions. And those instructions, when it enters the human cells, they are used to make more copies of the virus. And that's that book of instructions that is the genome.
So, is it fair for me to characterise it as kind of like a fingerprint for the virus?
Well, in a sense, it's almost the recipe that defines how the virus is made, and then sometimes in that recipe changes happen. Just like if you get a recipe from the internet and you read there's only one clove of garlic, and you really love garlic, you might make 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. That is your version of that recipe, and if you then hand that recipe over to another person, they will have that starting version with more garlic in it.
Gotcha. Right. Now that is clear to me. When you get a chain of infection, and let's just use the defence case as an example, because we've got persons A, B, C, D there. How close will the COVID genome sequence be, say, between case A and D? Will it be almost exactly the same? Will there be a slight variation? Or how do you know that there are people in between those two cases, A and D?
So in that particular cluster, all but one of the genomes were identical. So they're the exact same recipe, so no changes were made. And that is increasing the confidence that they were recently related to each other. So that recent interaction must have taken place.
So can you clarify for me then, if they're exactly the same or almost exactly the same, how do you know that A gave it to B as opposed to the other way round?
Yeah, so that's where the genomes of this virus do not tell you that much. That's where the epidemiological investigation that the public health units and our epidemiologists get into play. It's about when does a person start showing symptoms, what was their movement, what was their context. That will dictate the direction of that transmission chain.
And as the chain gets longer, do you expect to see a variation and how much of a variation in the genome sequence? Let's say if you had a case A and we get right down, hopefully never, to case W, would you expect those sequences to be hugely different?
Yeah, so every time that the virus goes to a new person, there's that chance for a difference to occur. So the more people it goes through, the larger the chance that happens. So what we, for example, saw in August up in Auckland was that at some point we had cases that were 4 mutations or 4 changes away from the original outbreak. So as time progresses, you expect those mutations to occur. So if all of a sudden you would find someone that has 2 or 3 mutations away from what you knew previously, that's when you really start scratching your head about missing links and those types of things, because that must have passed through multiple people to accumulate that number of mutations.
And that was ESR scientist Dr. Joep de Ligt there. Torrential rain has drenched the Waipa town of Te Awamutu this afternoon, bringing 54 millimetres in just half an hour. The basement of the council building is flooded, so too is the brand new town library. Mayor Jim Milcrest says at least 2 commercial premises have copped severe flooding, including Paper Plus Toy World and Robert Harris. Mr Milcrest says many businesses won't be open tomorrow as they deal with drenched stock and damage. There's also light flooding to the roads. We'll update you throughout the program. Meanwhile, in Taranaki, more than 100 millimetres of rain has fallen over the last 24 hours, causing slips, surface flooding and overwhelming sewerage systems. The emergency response team was mobilised in New Plymouth and public health warning signs put up at contaminated beaches, streams and rivers. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
That's the sound of Spud Andrews, a greenkeeper at the Paritutu Bowling Club, fishing mats out of its flooded greens. Spud's seen it all before.
A little river there, broke a banks there and broke a banks down there, and flooded the green. As you can see how high it is up there, along the wall. So it's not the first time, probably won't be the last time.
The little river Spud's referring to is the Manga Otuku stream. He reckons the amount of rain this morning meant it simply couldn't be contained.
They were supposed to have unblocked further up there so the water can go, but I think we just had too much rain today, just too much rain. Couldn't handle it, so she had to go somewhere, so she came over the top of the banks.
You're like a big stream down here.
Across the road at St Joseph's School, the principal, Mike Dowd, says the stream came up from one moment to the next.
Just really intense, heavy rain. So I guess if that was a deluge, that's what it was. And just the river just came up, broke the banks really quickly, and the road became a river. So it was impassable really from both ends.
He ditched the gumboots and went barefoot to help the kids into school.
Yeah, just ferrying kids out of cars, supporting parents. We had a teacher aide and a caretaker down there, so umbrellas and coats, and just getting kids up across the road safely and just monitoring traffic as well, trying to alleviate the congestion.
With more rain forecast this afternoon, Mr Dowd put the call out to parents to pick their children up after lunch if possible. The Mayor, Neil Holdham, says the deluge has had serious implications for the city's water infrastructure.
We've had stormwater inundate the wastewater system. We've had sewage overflows at Ngāmuru Beach, at the Te Nui pump station, near East End Beach, at the Huatoki pump station in town. We've also had reports that the Wawakaia River has overrun the pump station at Glen Avon.
He isn't glossing over the problem.
Essentially, we've got sewage in the waterways in those areas, so we'll have to put up notifications at the beaches. The concern is that we just need people to stay out of the water for a few days because we have just the system's been overwhelmed with stormwater, and so there's a risk to public health.
Met Service meteorologist Lewis Ferris is happy to confirm folk hadn't been imagining just how wet it'd been.
Heavy rain has definitely been around the Taranaki region over the last 24 hours, coming down into New Plymouth especially. There's been 90 millimetres in the last 18 hours up to midday. That's more than what was received in all of November 2019.
The outlook is better, however.
The good news is as the day progresses, the evening, this will ease back. We do have a heavy rain warning in force till 6 p.m. and a severe thunderstorm watch until 8 p.m.
And at least the rain's given the kids at St. Joe's something to talk about. Well, some of them anyway.
I was really high on the flood, it pushed down one of the fences, bended down a bit. It was really wet.
It was really crazy, water was just overflowing.
I was frightened dead. It covered the whole entire field. I thought it was cool.
In other weather-related news, an Air New Zealand flight from Wellington to Hamilton was diverted to Auckland this afternoon after it was suspected it had been hit by lightning. A company spokesperson says engineers are assessing the aircraft and its passengers have been put onto another flight to Hamilton. I Taranaki, mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Robin Martin-aho.
It is 22 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. You can see Robin's story there online, some great photos in that, and we'd love to hear from you if you're in an area that's being lashed by rain or you've had any flooding. Do let us know what it's like out there. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Reserve Bank says it stands ready to heed the government's call to help to cool the housing market, as all parties declare themselves committed to tackling the affordability crisis. Finance Minister Grant Robertson has written to the bank's governor, asking him to consider house price inflation when mulling over monetary policy. Today, Adrian Orr said he'll take that on board, but issued a warning of his own. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The exchange of letters marks a turning point in how New Zealand's political and financial institutions will tackle the housing crisis. The government's called on the significant resource and influence of the central bank to help stop the runaway train, concerned about the economic risk and the inequality it's causing between those who own homes and those who do not. Adrian Orr acknowledged the impact of monetary policy on house prices.
Rising household wealth and its feed through into consumer and investor confidence is an important channel for monetary policy to be effective. However, it is only one channel.
In his initial response to the Finance Minister, Mr Orr said the bank already took asset and house prices into account. He told reporters that was to give context about what it's doing.
I just wanted to make sure that people understand where we're starting from, have clear expectations around what can and can't be done. Because setting up false expectations for broad stakeholders, public alike, is not good policy setting.
I asked Grant Robertson whether his request reflected any belief the bank had not been doing what was expected in the current circumstances within its existing mandate.
Yeah, I think it's just timely. That's the point. This is a situation where it's all hands to the pump. And, we took the decision that we would write to the Reserve Bank. That's, in fact, the appropriate process if you want to change the remit. It's actually laid out in law, and so therefore we were following that. But equally, it's an opportunity to ask about other advice and other suggestions.
The National leader, Judith Collins, is grudgingly supportive of Mr Robertson's recruitment of the Reserve Bank.
People of New Zealand will be looking at this and saying how quaint they're sending letters to each other and telling the media about it as they're doing it. But we'll wait and see.
Didn't your Shadow Treasurer say yesterday that this was a good idea?
It is absolutely a good idea. And that's why it's nice that Grant Robertson has followed Andrew Bailey's advice.
The Greens say the government has done a disservice to New Zealanders by not introducing measures to quell demand through the tax system. Labour ruled out any new taxes under this government and very specifically no capital gains or other tax on assets. Green MP Julianne Genter was asked whether the current crisis warranted them breaking that promise.
They didn't have a mandate to close the border until we had a pandemic. We're in the middle of a crisis, and it's probably the expectation of the New Zealand public that the government will take the action that's needed to stop runaway house prices.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the remit for the Reserve Bank to think of ways it could help dampen the market is broad, and he's open to all suggestions.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole point of this is actually to involve all of the parts of the government's broader economic approach in a discussion about what we do about rapidly escalating house prices and providing more affordable housing and a more equitable environment for first home buyers. So, I'm certainly open to those suggestions. Bear in mind, at the same time, we have asked the Treasury to go away and look at what we can do as a government on the demand side.
Tribunal was asked whether the bank would look at taxation as part of its response.
One would assume that issues of taxation would be in the broader work agenda, so we will see what comes. There has been so much work over decades on this issue that I don't think problem identification is too difficult. It's really around what are the objective functions of the work and appetites for accepting policy recommendations.
Today's financial stability report highlights the risk posed by a sharp fall in house prices or a rise in unemployment that could affect people's ability to service a mortgage or loan. Mr Orr says there has been an increase in high-risk mortgage lending, not so much owner-occupiers but property investors, which is why the bank intends to reintroduce loan-to-value ratio restrictions to stop that increasing even further. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And as politicians and policy wonks mull over the best solutions, property prices continue to march on up. So what does it look like on the ground as the market gets hotter than ever? Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
Third and final call, selling, going, and sold 3,590. Congratulations.
Clap of the hammer, the rush of bids and the sometimes eye-watering prices can make auctions a daunting affair. And right now, things are at fever pitch.
1 week ago, we put up 100 auctions. I don't think we've ever done that before. I think in the last 4 weeks, we've listed about 1,300 new auctions.
Barfoot and Thompson auctioneer Murray Smith runs the show here in East Auckland. Despite the crowds, today is actually slower than it has been, but there are still plenty of investors and owner-occupiers about. First home buyers are harder to find though.
I've been doing this more than 30 years and every time we see a little run like this, that's a question that comes up. Can people afford homes? Look, it will run for a while and then it'll stop. In a couple of years' time, we'll be going, we wish we had that busy market that we had a couple of years ago.
Final call, 800,000 right-hand side. Opening.
Signing the paperwork on their new property are Javid and Manjani Khan.
We walked in through that door and he went crazy with the bidding.
They're downsizing to free up some cash and are ecstatic about being able to buy a new place.
We didn't think we would be able to get a house today, to be honest. We came in with that mindset, but I'm just glad that we got lucky. Yeah.
The struggle is real. 9 houses from the 20 for sale in this morning's session have been passed in because they failed to reach the top dollar being asked for. Of the homes that did sell, 8 have sold for above their RV, 7 have sold for more than $1 million. Property investor Tony Singh has just missed out on a property in South Auckland's Weymouth, which went for $900,000. Its RV was $600,000.
I really feel bad for the first home buyers, to be very honest. And if it had been the buyer would have been the first one, the bidder would have been the first one buyer, I would have backed out. But I never knew that, so I had my certain limit price to pay for it. I went up to that, and I just backed off rather than fighting. And it would have been good for the vendor, but I backed off. And but later on, when I talked to the congratulator, and I asked her, and she said it was an investment. I said that's fine. It's up to her, you see.
He says the high prices are shutting people out and suggests real estate agents may need to drop their commission fees to ease costs.
Sometimes I feel they are overcharging because the property comes on the market on the open home on Saturday and Sunday and it's auction on Tuesday. It's just 2 days, 3 days work and they are getting maybe 25 grand give and take. So if it's less, then maybe it will be 15 grand, so the 10 grand will be reduced to the buyer, first home buyers.
Fellow investor Adam Hampson says conditions were better for buying 6 months ago, but New Zealand's market is still a good place to do business.
New Zealand, fortunately, is quite a great country for property investment, and all this COVID is only going to encourage people like New Zealanders offshore to buy back home, or people to want to immigrate to New Zealand. I think that's all going to support the property market, yeah. For a property investor who's holding the property for the long term, there's no tax on your gain under the current rulings, so that's very attractive.
While he agrees there aren't many first home buyers about, he thinks investors aren't keeping them away.
Sometimes investors are competing with first home buyers, but they've got different desires and different budgets. I don't think that's such a problem.
Nationally, the median house price is $725,000 and in Auckland it's $1 million. On the streets of Henderson, home ownership is a fantasy for some.
I'd love to own a home if I won the lotto or something like that.
Prices these days, 1.25 million in Oranga, and that's just for a shed of 1 bedroom. It's crap.
Definitely not. It's way out of my affordability right now.
I do own quite a few properties, rental properties and my personal home as well, but I think the way the market is going at the moment, I think there's no show that it's going to slow down in the near future. I think it's probably be maybe another good couple of years before it slows down.
I live with my sister. All my money, all my savings are gone, so I just live week by week, and there's no way I'd ever afford a house anyway.
First home buyers are reported to have hit a record share of the market this year, now 24%, up from an average of 21%. But for those still trying to get in, auctioneer Murray Smith has this to say.
The first home is always the hardest for someone to buy, and once they've bought their first home, they're on and they're going. And buying a home's not easy. Buying a home is a privilege as well. And I think people, if they work hard and do what's necessary, they end up in a home.
We'll get underway at 1.2, but I will take 25s, 1-2 right-hand side.
A privilege that's feeling more and more like a pipe dream for many New Zealanders. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
If you were listening to that story on radio, you can watch Nick and Nita's video online. The last 2 elephants in New Zealand are being moved overseas after multiple attempts to expand the herd failed. Auckland Zoo's female Asian elephants, Angeli and Burma, will be transported by plane to join a new family herd at a yet-to-be-determined location. Reporter Nick Trubridge and camera operator Simon Rogers dropped into the Auckland Zoo this afternoon, and Nick started by asking Zoo Director Kevin Bewley what challenges staff faced in trying to breed a family of elephants.
So there have been 2 main areas that have confronted us in recent years. The first is that the original plan was to bring in 2 elephants from the orphanage in Sri Lanka. Angeli was the first, who arrived in 2015, and there was supposed to be a second one coming shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, because of court action in Sri Lanka, that animal got inadvertently caught up in, she still stays in Sri Lanka and is at the orphanage to this day, as far as we know. Secondly, with Angeli here, the plan was always to try and breed from her, give her a calf of her own and build up the family herd here. That was a decision we made back in 2011. The plan to do that was through artificial insemination, or AI, and to do that we rely on semen from Australia and the Australian coordinated program there. So we did a total of 5 AI attempts with her over the years, and initially we didn't have a good understanding of what her reproductive cycle was. So Angeli's actually quite unusual in that her biology, physiology, she's particularly sensitive to one hormone, and that's resulted in her releasing the egg actually quite early in the cycle. So with the AI attempts, it meant that we were putting the semen in just slightly after the necessary time. So once we had that knowledge, great, but unfortunately we're then in a situation where we can't get any more semen. So the main donor bull in Australia died, and sourcing that semen then became impossible. On top of that, we're now in a situation where we've got COVID-19 and the requirements for 2 weeks of quarantine, and given that any AI absolutely relies on collecting the sample, transporting the sample, and then using the sample within 24 hours, it's just untenable.
And, you know, I assume you've got keepers who are around these animals relatively regularly. How are they feeling about the fact that they are going to be moved on? These 2 elephants will be leaving the zoo.
So it's a devastating time for them, for all of us, and I believe for the wider Auckland community. They're so much a part of our lives and have been for so long. The team here provide an exceptional level of care for them. We know we have happy animals. We know they live a great life. What we can't do is provide for their long-term future. And so, yeah, it's deeply upsetting for them. And you know, we really wish we could have provided a future for them here. They are absolutely committed to the care of those animals, so when we do identify the new home for them, they will travel with them, help them settle into their new home and ensure that it's as stress-free as possible for them.
And will that new home be overseas?
Yeah, so there are no other elephants in New Zealand, and that's one of the tragic things here, that when Angelie and Burma leave us, there will be no elephants in New Zealand. It's unlikely that there will be elephants for the foreseeable future in this country. So yes, necessarily they will need to go overseas in order to fulfil their long-term future needs.
And why is that? Why won't we see any elephants here once these two have left for the foreseeable future?
So doing elephants well, as we do here, requires an enormous level of commitment and resources. I think the challenges we faced in recent years and the circumstances we have mean that I cannot really see a pathway for any zoo within this country to do it properly in the foreseeable future.
How do you transport these animals once they do eventually leave? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and moving elephants is obviously a considerable logistical challenge. We have had experience of it, of course, with 2015 and moving Angelie from Sri Lanka. But there's a lot of planning that goes into it, a lot of liaising with the receiving organisation. The planning involves training the animals, getting them used to the prospect of the move, and then of course the staff travelling with them. And so by having that continuity of care, the staff that they are familiar with being with them throughout, it really helps that reduce that potential level of stress for them.
And that was our reporter Nick Trubridge talking to Auckland Zoo Director Kevin Bewley about the departure of Asian elephants, Angelie and Burma. If you were listening to that, there are some wonderful pictures. Do check out the video online. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the dark side of Black Friday sales and the items which may need a buyer beware sticker. MPs are back in the House and the Speaker's been reinstated with plenty of free advice. And as you heard, the country's only 2 elephants are saying bye-bye. We would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
ESR scientists are urgently trying to determine where an Air New Zealand crew member was infected with COVID-19. The person first tested positive in Shanghai and is now in quarantine at the Jet Park Hotel in Auckland. ESR scientist Dr. Joep de Ligt told Checkpoint genome sequencing will identify whether the infection was acquired locally or during travel. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health says fewer than 10 people scanned into Animates Manukau when the now confirmed case of COVID-19 visited. It's prompted a reminder of the importance of using the COVID Tracer app. The head of Oranga Tamariki has rejected speculation that she's resigning amid claims that she was set to leave. Gráinne Moss appeared at the Waitangi Tribunal urgent inquiry regarding the disproportionate taking of Maori babies from their whānau. Ms Moss says she has no idea where the rumours about her resignation came from, but she confirmed that she is staying at the ministry, which has been under intense scrutiny. The Mayor of New Plymouth is warning residents to steer clear of contaminated beaches, rivers and streams after today's heavy rain. About 100 millimetres of rain fell inside a 24-hour period, causing several sewage pump stations to be overwhelmed and spill into the city's waterways. Councils across the Wellington region have agreed to further investigate whether to roll out water meters for households in a bid to reduce demand. The authority, which oversees the supply of water across the area, Wellington Water, says at current rates they won't be able to supply enough water to meet demand by 2026. A man who lives near a compost plant in Christchurch says the smell is so bad he sometimes drives away and sleeps in his car to avoid it. The Living Earth compost plant in Bromley, which is owned by the Christchurch City Council, has been the subject of complaints for years. A council meeting to mitigate the problem today was adjourned when residents raised concerns over a lack of consultation. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Oranga Tamariki's Chief Executive, Gráinne Moss, is digging in, refusing to resign in the face of stiff criticism. Yet another scathing report into the agency was released this week, and the new Minister for Children, Kelvin Davis, has refused to express confidence in her leadership. The Waitangi Tribunal's own inquiry into Oranga Tamariki convened in Wellington today, where Gráinne Moss conceded for the first time publicly that structural racism exists within the agency. But she says she still has work to do. Tianiwa Hurihanganui was there.
There's been growing speculation over the future of Gráinne Moss's leadership at Oranga Tamariki. But today, Gráinne Moss put the record straight.
I'm not set to resign. Yes, I can confirm I'm staying in my role.
Why are you staying on?
Oh, because I'm absolutely committed to the kaupapa and we've made really good progress, but there's lots more to do. And look, it's a privilege to be able to have an opportunity to improve the outcomes for Tamariki Rangatahi and their whānau and to make change.
A damning report by the Children's Commission this week concluded many major failings by the agency are simply unfixable. At the Waitangi Tribunal's urgent inquiry today, Ms Moss dismissed Kelvin Davis's refusal to express confidence in her leadership and says she hasn't been asked to step down.
So we're in the process of getting to know each other, and we've had some very constructive, positive meetings, conversations. He is deeply, deeply committed to better outcomes, and I'm deeply committed to those outcomes too.
But better outcomes seems a long way off, with multiple inquiries highlighting major failings in the system, including the traumatic way social workers have taken babies from their mothers without notice. The Waitangi Tribunal's urgent inquiry is the 5th inquiry into the agency since the attempted uplift of a Maori newborn from a Hawke's Bay mother's hospital bed last year. In her submission, Gráinne Moss conceded for the first time that the Crown is yet to eliminate the structural racism it inhibits.
On the question of structural racism is a feature of the care and protection system which has had adverse effects for Tamariki Maori, whānau, hapu and iwi, and has detrimentally impacted the relationship between Maori and the Crown.
She also acknowledged the Crown's failure to fully adopt the recommendations of the 1988 Puʻao Te Atatu report, which outlined ways the ministry could better respond to the needs of Māori. She says Oranga Tamariki has made some progress, including 7 formal partnerships with iwi and adopting the new 7AA legislation in many areas, which requires decision makers to consider the importance of a child's whakapapa when they enter state care. But Children's Commissioner Judge Andrew Beecroft told the Tribunal 7AA has so far failed to protect Māori children and fails to create meaningful partnerships.
It is Oranga Tamariki who determines if there is to be a strategic partnership. It is Oranga Tamariki who determines if there is funding and how much is to be given to the partnership. It is still hard to conclude that 7AA does no more, and I say this carefully and thoughtfully, does no more than perpetuate in law a master and servant relationship.
He says many of the problems at Oranga Tamariki cannot be fixed by a restructure, and the only way forward is to devolve power to hapu, iwi and Māori organisations to do the agency's work.
In our view, in its current form, it is highly unlikely that the care and protection system can deliver both safety and well-being to Tamariki Māori and their whānau.
But reimagining a new state care system where Māori have the decision-making power and resources may not be as simple as it sounds. The Tribunal spent much of the day deliberating about what that actually looks like and how they navigate issues where Tamariki live outside of their tribal lands. Those discussions will continue tomorrow when the Tribunal meets again in Wellington. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
Let's head to Wellington now for business news with Emma Hatton. Kia ora, Emma. So, lots of housing talk today, housing market hot. And basically the financial stability report, it came out too, but was slightly under the radar.
That's right, Lisa. So, this was the Reserve Bank's half-yearly financial stability report, and housing was a big part of that report, and it obviously dominated the narrative of the media coverage of that report, and indeed the press conference afterwards, which the Reserve Bank governor fronted. But leaving housing aside, I wanted to go through some of the other things that was in that report. Basically, the report said that financial stability had been and was being supported by fiscal and monetary policy, and that this support had prevented a substantial rise in unemployment, and that business failures had remained at low levels so far, in particular hailing the wage subsidy scheme as a great success. But the report basically said, look, we're doing well, we've been relatively sheltered so far, but we are not out of the woods yet. There are risks and they remain to the downside. In particular, the global spread of COVID-19 remains hugely problematic. Disruption to international travel, of course, the threat of another outbreak in New Zealand, and that sentiment is weighing really heavily on business and their investment intentions, keeping things quite pared back in that regard. And there will be challenges over the medium term. We're already seeing ramifications of low demand for tourism and export education, as well as challenges in accessing migrant labour. The Reserve Bank actually suggesting that there could be the need for more targeted fiscal stimulus for these areas. It also did note that while the retail banks hadn't realised any significant loan defaults yet, these are expected to come. And looking at the bank's earnings reports, obviously we're seeing them put aside hundreds of millions of dollars for these bad debts when they are realised. The report also looked at commercial property, saying this is an asset class that can be hit quite hard if an economic downturn occurs, and that they're already seeing sort of a lot of vacancies in second-tier commercial stock. So not the big flashy new buildings that are being built, but just your bog standard office blocks in Auckland and Wellington. Less interest in those sorts of assets at the moment as well. Agriculture, always, banks have long been limiting their exposure to this. Rural lending sector, and the Reserve Bank saying they're going to need to be even more careful of this, particularly as the industry is hard hit by that access to migrant labour as well. So look, it's a rip-roaring read. It's about 60 pages long. If anyone out there's listening who thinks, I wonder what else was in there, get it off the Reserve Bank's website and have a look through.
Fill your boots. What was going on the market today, Emma?
Yeah, it was a big day on the market, actually. It had its biggest one-day gain in more than 2 weeks. It closed up 115 points, almost a whole percent, 0.9% in fact, 12,668 points it is closed at. And looking at the currencies as well, New Zealand dollar very strong, 69.8 US cents, 94.9 Australian and 52 British pence. Now, I need to mention, I know we're short on time, but Nicholas Poynton, my colleague, he loves Bitcoin. He told me just before I came on air, it has today eclipsed $27,000 for one Bitcoin. Last week he was excited when it hit 26,000. So look, doing that, getting the word out there on Bitcoin on behalf of him.
Big numbers there, Emma. Thanks very much. That's Emma Hatton joining us from Wellington with our business news today. Buckle up. Black Friday is looming with consumers bombed with ads for bigger, better bargains to buy now. But are you being gamed? It's an American tradition with enormous sales the day after Thanksgiving. But data from Price Spy, a New Zealand price comparison website, suggests about 9% of products actually went up in the week before Black Friday and dropped on the day, apparently to make the sale prices look a little bit more attractive. And some of the most sought-after tech products actually offered the worst deals. Tech and gadget commentator Jordan Tinney warns Black Friday specials come with a buyer beware sticker.
It's marketing fear of missing out, isn't it? It's attracting that fear that you will miss something that you needed at that moment. And that's really where the biggest tip around this day is you just need to be prepared and just make sure you know what you're checking, what you're in for. You don't necessarily need it on the day. It's exciting, but you might have a better deal in future.
So are the deals on the day actually all they're cracked up to be? What does data tell us about that?
Yeah, so they can be pretty good. 43% of products went down last year, which is quite large, but apparently 1 in 10 products actually went up in price. So there are bargains to be had, but that's pretty much like every other day in the year. It's about spotting that right moment and whether or not you actually need it at that time. I personally don't think Black Friday has as much impact as it used to be, simply because there's so many specials happening throughout the year, and especially with COVID-19, we've been seeing retailers react to that in different ways, and we've definitely seen a lot of change in marketing strategy and pricing out there reacting to this pandemic.
So, as confusing as this may sound, some prices actually go up in the week of the Black Friday sale.
Yeah.
What's all that about? Explain to me what happens.
Yeah, so through the data that Price Buy has supplied to us, they've seen some retailers do mark up the price just so that when they retail it at the time, they can sell it and make it look like it's gone down in price, but really the margin hasn't actually changed that much. They're not losing out as much. If we look at the number one product last year, the Nintendo Switch, that retailed at about $497, but about roughly a month before that, you could actually purchase it at $450. So it's watching the market and actually seeing what it does. And Price Buy has a really great historical tool where you can actually look at what a product has been doing over the last year or 3 months or 6 months and see if the bargain you're getting is actually any good. And, potentially they could be breaching consumer rights by marking it up in price like that.
Excuse the pun, Jordan. So basically, in some cases, we're being gamed, aren't we?
We are being gamed, but that's essentially what marketing is, isn't it? It's gamifying our spending habits so that they can catch us at the right time and, get us to spend with them. That is essentially what the retailer wants. They want us to spend our money with them.
So tech is one of the big things that is pushed and marketed around this particular day. Yeah. Do you get the best deals on tech, or actually should you be kind of waiting for tech and spending your money somewhere else? Are there better deals on other categories of product?
Yeah, again, it's conducting that price research over the year and seeing if there is actually a better price to be had on the day. The biggest ones that people search for are mobile phones. Mobile phones actually only moved about 2%, which isn't really a large margin. And it's hard because a lot of the phones that people do want are premium models. It's the latest iPhone, it's the latest Samsung Galaxy. And those don't really move in price essentially because they replace those devices annually. So you don't really see the margin be as big as you want it to be. And again, that's like you said, they've gamified that by basically supplying a subscription service to hardware because you want the newest device the next year.
So in summary, Jordan, keep calm and check out the price.
Oh, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Keep calm and check out the price. Do your research, folks. Just make sure you're actually looking out for the best price. And you never know, you might find a better price another day.
Jordan, you're an expert in this kind of stuff. Let me ask you, do you get all fired up and go shopping on Black Friday?
So thankfully, because of how Black Friday played out in America, I had nothing to do with the day. I try to, like we've pointed out, I try to research over the year. Once I've seen that good price, that's when I try to go for it. But Black Friday, the day for me, as an image has been so tarnished by just how insane people got in America over it that I personally try to avoid it the most of the time, but I do know a lot of the background of how the day has come about.
And that's tech commentator Jordan Tinney. It is 7 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Labor MP Trevor Mallard has been confirmed as the Speaker of the House as MPs were officially sworn in today. The 53rd Parliament was formally opened by the Royal Commissioners this morning. Mr Mallard was nominated unchallenged, but MPs across the House had words of advice and some requests for him. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough with all the pomp and ceremony.
After a prolonged election campaign and the formation of the government, the 53rd Parliament is now in session. National held a caucus meeting this morning. Its MPs were amped for the first day.
It's like the first day of school, really, isn't it? Always excitement.
Good, living the dream. I'm so excited and I just can't hide it.
3 commissioners sent on behalf of the Governor-General made their way from the Supreme Court to Parliament.
Her Majesty's commissioners approach. Please take your seats.
After declaring the Parliament open, the Clerk of the House was empowered to swear in the MPs.
Kitty Lindsay Allen.
Ko hau, ko Kitty Lindsay Allen.
In alphabetical order, MPs came up to swear either an oath or an affirmation. To save time, some MPs came up in pairs.
I, Todd Michael Macleay, swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty.
But reading at the same time, proving a challenge for some.
According to law, so help me God.
And successors according to law, so help me God.
Swearing in is necessary to give MPs the ability to speak in the chamber and vote. They were straight on to their first vote of the term, selecting the Speaker of the House.
I nominate the Right Honourable Trevor Mallard for the office of Speaker.
Throughout the swearing-in ceremony, Trevor Mallard was sat at the back of the chamber, with a dodgy light bulb flashing on and off above him, almost as if to say, "Pick me, pick me."
There being no further nominations, the Right Honourable Trevor Mallard is declared elected Speaker.
Traditionally, those who nominated the Speaker are meant to grab them and drag them up to the chair.
Members will see that, as with last time, I wasn't prepared to start my term as Speaker with a breach of privilege by pretending reluctance.
Mr Mallard thanked MPs for their support and promised to help the opposition hold the government to account. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern congratulated Mr Mallard and thanked him for the significant changes he made last term.
In some ways, it has been in small acts. I will forever remember after the 15th of March, and you chose to begin it with a prayer delivered by a member of the Muslim community.
National leader Judith Collins had this good-natured advice for him.
Just occasionally, a little bit of humour every now and again would help alleviate a bit of the tension. And might I suggest a little bit more of that little cunning smile that you have there would be excellent.
Greens co-leader James Shaw had a personal plea.
If you are looking at further reforms, I wonder if we could take a look at the rule that requires gentlemen to wear ties.
And ACT's Deputy Leader Brooke Van Velden had a request for more accommodating sitting hours.
Such as for our member of Northland, so that he can fly to Auckland, drive 3 hours, get home at a reasonable time to milk his cows bright and early in the morning.
Tomorrow marks the state opening of the Parliament, with the Governor-General Dame Patsy Reddy delivering the speech from the throne. And then the 53rd Parliament will officially get down to business. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
A dead woman's fight to get ACC cover has continued to be debated in the Court of Appeal. Deanna Trevathan died in 2016 from mesothelioma, a lung cancer caused by asbestos fibres. Before her death, she pushed to get ACC cover for financial assistance, but was rejected because she wasn't exposed to asbestos at work. Jonathan Mitchell has been in court.
As a child, Deanna Trevathan was exposed to asbestos by hugging her father, who was an electrician. He was often in work clothes and had been exposed to asbestos on the job. There has been no disputing the fact that asbestos fibres caused Deanna Trevathan's lung cancer. But while alive, she was denied cover by ACC because it wasn't a workplace injury. After her death, her family continued the legal battle, and last year a High Court decision by Justice Mallon ruled the corporation was wrong and should have accepted her claim. ACC has appealed the decision, saying it raises significant questions about the boundaries for ACC cover. The test is whether she suffered personal injury by accident. At the Court of Appeal, ACC lawyer Paul Radich QC questioned whether the fibres caused irreparable damage from the outset.
We know the fibre entered, we know that it was there, but did it cause damage to the body when it entered? And perhaps the answer is yes.
He says there's not enough evidence.
What we do not know at the moment is whether the inhalation of a fibre caused damage in and of itself. We don't know, was it the fibre that caused damage, or was there no damage at that point, but was there a process of some sort?
However, Beatrix Woodhouse, a lawyer for Angela Calver, who's representing Ms Trevathan's estate, backed Justice Mallon's decision. She repeated it was an injury caused by accident.
By the very fact that you have mesothelioma, it shows that you did have an inhalation of injurious fibres. So, and that's exactly how Justice Mullen framed the accident. It's personal injury caused by accident. You need those two components.
The Court of Appeal reserved its decision. For Checkpoint, Court Jonathan Mitchell-Aho.
And some of your feedback now before the news at 6 on the elephants at Auckland Zoo that are leaving the country, last elephants in New Zealand going. Louise says, I remember seeing the elephant Kamala at Wellington Zoo as a child in the 1950s and 60s with great fondness and wonderment. Louise says it will be a very sad day when New Zealand children will no longer be able to see a live elephant in a New Zealand zoo. But others don't believe that to be the case. They want them gone.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. Scientists are racing to develop a complete picture of the COVID-19 transmission chain responsible for infecting an international Air New Zealand crew member. The person first tested positive in Shanghai and is now in quarantine at the Jet Park Hotel in Auckland. ESR is now working on genome sequencing and will compare the sample to other strains on the database. Dr. Joop de Ligt told Checkpoint sequencing will identify whether the infection was acquired locally or during travel.
If we were to find a link to one of our New Zealand genomes that it is very similar to that tells us with quite some certainty that they are part of a same transmission chain, as we call it. So that means that in terms of investigations, we can start to look at how those two people might have interacted.
Dr. Joop de Ligt from ESR. The Waitangi Tribunal has been told new legislation requiring Oranga Tamariki to create meaningful partnerships with iwi has failed to live up to its promises. The Tribunal met with Crown representatives and claimants in Wellington today for its urgent inquiry into the agency. The Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, said in his submission the legislation 7AA has failed.
It is Oranga Tamariki who determines if there is to be a strategic partnership. It is Oranga Tamariki who determines if there is funding and how much is to be given to the partnership. It is still hard to conclude that 7AA does no more than perpetuate in law a master and servant relationship.
Children's Commissioner Judge Andrew Beecroft. Residential mortgage lending for October was the largest monthly amount on record according to Reserve Bank data. Total new mortgage commitments were $7.8 billion, the largest amount since records began in 2013. First home buyers accounted for almost 18% of new mortgages, down slightly on last month, while investors made up 24.4% of new loans, up on September. Year-on-year growth in the value of new mortgage commitments to first home buyers was 26.6%, while for investors the growth was 58%. The Reserve Bank plans to reimpose loan-to-value ratio restrictions in an effort to cool high-risk mortgage lending. The authority which oversees Wellington's water network has got the green light to further investigate installing water meters across the region. A new report has found at the current rate, demand for water could outstrip supply in 5 years' time. The region has the second highest consumption rate of water of all 5 big cities. The chair of Wellington Water Committee, David Bassett, says water metering is an effective way to bring down consumption.
By 2026, we could be looking for additional resources of water. And I do not want to see, and I know our community doesn't want to see, as major rationalisation of water.
A business case will now be prepared assessing the cost of rolling out water meters. Met Service says most of the wet and wild weather that battered much of the North Island today has passed, but there is still a risk of a return. A severe thunderstorm warning was issued for an area near Taupo this afternoon, but the cell has since tracked off to the southeast. Meteorologist Lewis Ferris says Auckland was hit with a band of showers about 1 o'clock and isolated heavy showers are still possible. He says although Taranaki had a lot of rain overnight and this morning, the forecast is looking better.
At this point, they're still just dealing with a few showers lingering around the region. They will see some more showers this evening and heading into tomorrow, but the heaviest, most persistent rain looks to have done its dash.
Lewis Ferris says about 300 lightning strikes at the central North Island this afternoon. Meanwhile, New Plymouth residents are being warned to steer clear of beaches, rivers and streams after heavy rain overwhelmed several sewerage pumping stations. Russia is claiming that one of its warships chased off a US Navy destroyer after it entered territorial waters in the Sea of Japan. Moscow says it threatened to ram the USS John McCain. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
Russia and the US regularly accuse the other of breaching military rules, but incidents like this, with the risk of a collision at sea, are rare. Moscow says the destroyer travelled about 2 kilometres across its maritime border in the Peter the Great Gulf in the Sea of Japan, a body of water bordered by Japan, Russia and the Koreas. The US Navy denies any wrongdoing and rejects the idea that its ship was expelled. The two countries have also yet to finalise the last remaining nuclear arms pact between them, which is due to expire in February. This is Max Toll.
It's 5 minutes past 6. The former All Blacks captain Tana Umaga has lent his support to embattled current coach Ian Foster. With just 2 wins from his first 5 matches in charge, Foster's under pressure ahead of the side's final test of the year against Argentina this weekend. The All Blacks have lost their past 2 tests but haven't endured a hat-trick of losses since 1998. Umaga, a former head coach at the Blues, is confident their fortunes will improve.
I've been in that spot myself, so you know to an extent what Fozzie's going through, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So I know in our small community of coaches at this level, we all feel for him, and you know that he's doing his best to change it around.
Tana Umaga. The Black Caps have been forced to make late changes to their squad for the first cricket test against the West Indies, which immediately follows the upcoming T20 series. All-rounder Colin de Grandhomme and left-arm spinner Ajaz Patel have been ruled out through injury, with Daryl Mitchell and Mitchell Santner coming into the squad. Leading New Zealand free skier Byron Wells is retiring from competition after 12 years at the top level. The 28-year-old finished 4th in the half-pipe at the 2018 Winter Olympics and says his body is beaten up and his knees have been screaming at him to stop for the past 5 years. A bumper fleet of 89 boats will contest the annual Sydney to Hobart yacht race, which starts on Boxing Day. Although record 9 times winner Wild Oats 11 and 3 times winner Comanche will be missing. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, I venture out of the studio to take part in the Citizen Science program to sample my local stream for traces of DNA left behind by things living in it. Hopefully not doing too much of other stuff in it. And if you enjoyed my chat with Steve Barnett on his nostalgic book looking at Kiwis and their cars from the 50s to the 80s, we're giving it away in tonight's Hump Quiz, all on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A low and associated fronts approaching from the Tasman Sea affects the North Island and Upper South Island. Warnings and watches are in force for heavy rain. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain or showers, thunderstorms and downpours are possible tonight. Showers tomorrow, possibly thundery in Taupo. For the remainder of the North Island, periods of rain today, showers tomorrow, possibly thundery from Manawatu and the Tararua district northwards. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago. Patchy rain were more widespread in Nelson and Marlborough with some heavy falls, easing to scattered showers by the morning. Westland, Fiordland, the remainder of Otago and Southland mainly fine. High cloud increasing tomorrow and scattered rain developing by night. Chatham Islands mainly fine, rain developing overnight tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Maori Party is officially back in Parliament and they have made their arrival well heard with a promise to try and change the oath of allegiance. A kākoi of Maori Party loyals made their way down the country, arriving this morning, passing on the mauri of the Maori Party campaign to the newly elected MPs Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngāre Waipaka. Mani Dunlop reports.
Carrying
carrying a copy of the treaty, a Ringetū prayer book and a mere from Ngāti Ruanui, Waiariki MP and Maori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi performed a wairia before speedily and unenthusiastically pledging allegiance to the Queen in the 53rd swearing-in today. He explains the meaning behind it.
That wairia was about a pushback of the Owati that constantly keeps our people down and on bended knee to a sovereign that we never gave sovereignty to.
He announced he hopes to change the pledge to acknowledge the Treaty of Waitangi with a members' bill. But in the meantime, co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer says the party did what they could within the standing orders.
We have to find ways that we assert the treaty until they change the oath. And the party showed that can be done with no one losing anything. And I think that's what we're here to do, show the way we can change things innovatively and mana enhancing.
Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, who also carried a copy of Te Tiriti o Waitangi when he swore his oath, says it is an old oath which sits within the Constitution. He says it could be changed if there is an appetite, but says in the scheme of things, although it's important, it's not a matter of urgency.
Well, it could certainly be done by then if people wanted to. I mean, it's a question of whether, first of all, whether the government's prepared to pick it up. There is a new provision in the standing orders where if a majority of members who are not in the government decide that they want to progress a member's bill, then they can do that. And I think this would be ideal for that, because I don't know many people who think that the oath and affirmation in its current form is appropriate for New Zealand in the 21st century.
And earlier this morning, a group of Maori Party supporters brought with them the Maori of the campaign to Parliament before blessing the new MP's offices. And among the group was John Tamihere, and although he failed in his bid to win the Tamaki Makaurau seat, he will be back too as the party's interim chief of staff. For Checkpoint, Kormani Dunlop tēnei.
A COVID contact tracing card trialled by iwi volunteers has got the thumbs up for being convenient and easy to use, especially for those who aren't tech savvy, according to Te Arawa Kaumatua Monty Morrison. The Ministry of Health combined forces with the iwi for the week-long trial that involved more than 1,200 people from Nongataha near Rotorua. In essence, the card records when another tracing card has been in close contact without the wearer having to do anything, making it easier to track people if they've come in contact with someone who's infected with COVID. The spokesperson for Te Arawa COVID-19 Response Hub is Monty Morrison. He told me a mix of people took part in the trial.
The Ministry of Health chose a community of about 5,000 just out of the city of Rotorua. It has a balance of both European and Maori, and within that community there are 4 local marae, and that gave us a good number of Maori who would be able to participate. So the trial required between 500 and 1,500 to take up the trial. And look, we're thrilled that I think almost 1,270 participants signed up. And it was really a near even split up between Maori and New Zealand European.
So did many of those people have smartphones?
Some of them would have. The general feedback has been that the card was just so much easier to use. You just had to put it on around your neck and forget about it, rather than using the smartphone and having to use it at every place that you went to. So, that's been the general reaction so far.
So they liked the convenience of it, did they, Monty?
Yes,
just chuck it round your neck and away you go.
Yes, correct. And it was really interesting because we've had feedback from people that the cards were seen in Tauranga, Taupo, and even as far away as Wellington. So certainly people were able to move around and be able to do something, many of them quite easily. And of course, you've got to be mindful that many of our kaumātua and others have older phones and they don't feel confident using the app. That's the other thing that's kind of come back.
For Te Arawa, why was it important for you to be involved in this?
We know the stats in terms of health are that Maori are going to be 50% more susceptible to the effects of COVID-19 than non-Maori. It's sobering that, and of course many of those would die. So The other part of that, of course, for us was that that a lot of our most susceptible don't have access to either a cell phone, and if they do, it's either old and they really don't know how to download it and then be able to use that smartphone technology. It was important for us to be involved simply because there would be some good learnings and good outcomes, not only for our community, but of course some good outcomes that could be recommended if it's used throughout the country.
So, Monty, I just want to go back to the wearing of the card, because some people did raise the issue of whether people would, A, remember to chuck it around their neck, and B, whether they'd feel comfortable with it, or whether it was this kind of weird thing hanging around your neck. So, I mean, did people feel comfortable wearing it in all situations? For example, going to tangi and things like that?
Yeah, look, we part of the feedback from some of the researchers has been that people did wear it at tangi. I know that it was worn there was a couple haka competition. There was a number of cards seen there. I was actually there.
I know it's not your decision whether this goes ahead or not, but given the things that you've outlined, that a number of your people may not have access to smartphones, they might not know how to use them properly, and you're concerned that not everyone has got the means to easily track their movements. If it's not this card, Monty, do you still feel there needs to be something else in the toolkit which is easier for the people who are in your community?
Yes, look, I know that the ministry is looking at a range of wearables, and I'm using the word wearables, not focusing on just the card. There could be another way in which the technology could be used. The card, there seems to be a really good acceptance to the use of the card, and we'll await really the findings as they come. Look, I would expect that from our point of view, you're right to point out the digital divide, and I think certainly the focus is going to be from a Te Aroha perspective is how do we look after those who are most vulnerable and probably don't have access to or won't have access to Bluetooth technology. So there might be some work done on limiting or providing better access and therefore decreasing what people are terming the digital divide.
Monty Morrison there. It is almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Figures from Fiji indicate alarming levels of abuse and neglect of children in the country. Latest government figures reveal there were 870 cases of child abuse and neglect recorded between January and July this year. The alleged child abuse at a prominent school last week has brought the issue to the fore again and left many shocked and angry. Christine Ravoy reports.
The Education Ministry has suspended 4 people amid police investigations over last week's alleged abuse at the government school. The ministry said one of the staff suspended was the acting head of the school. Police said they received the complaints where 4 students claimed they were physically abused by a teacher at the school. Education Minister Rosie Akbar said the complaints included inflicting harm and subjecting the students to inhumane and degrading treatment. Ms. Akbar says there is zero tolerance for any breach of the ministry's code of conduct.
Some very important policies that we have, and because you're talking about values education, the behavior management policies that we have, the child protection policies that we have, Child Welfare Act that we have. The procedure is, when we receive a complaint, we investigate, right? If there's assault, if there's physical abuse, etc., then of course everybody must know.
World Children's Day was celebrated in Fiji last weekend. Addressing school heads, Ms. Akbar said staff were responsible for the children's safety and well-being.
The head of school, it is your duty to report this, not to us. Your policy clearly states what can be directly reported to the police. Don't say, I reported to the ministry and the ministry did not report to the police. You are responsible. The head of school is responsible for managing the affairs of his or her own institution.
The minister said if found to have breached the ministry's policy, staff would be disciplined. Save the Children Fiji Director Sharana Ali says she was deeply disturbed by the reports of alleged child abuse in schools.
If you look at the increase in cases, and in any case for that matter involving a child, it shouldn't be happening in the first place. And so it's quite concerning. And I think at the root cause is really about people's moral values and people's lack of respect for children's rights.
Ms. Ali says Save the Children is working with other stakeholders to address the issue.
At no point in time a child should be hit. There shouldn't be any issues where a child is physically abused or abused emotionally or mentally. There shouldn't be any instance of that because teachers are now being trained to discipline children using alternative means, be in a position where they can talk to their children in a positive way.
According to the Ministry for Children, a total of 1,452 cases of child abuse and neglect were reported last year. Minister for Children Mereseni Vuniwanga says the statistics are telling.
We need to revamp the way that we protect and care for our children. It tells us that we need to be more innovative in the way that we deal with child abuse and neglect. It also tells us that we are continuing to fail as parents, as caregivers, or as persons and organizations who have been entrusted with the safety and well-being of our children.
Meanwhile, the Fiji Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission has launched its own investigation into the alleged abuse at the prominent school. The students' parents also lodged the complaints, with the commission claiming their children were stripped naked before having chilies rubbed on their mouths and private parts for leaving the school premises without permission. The parents claim the punishment was ordered by the assistant head of the school, who has been suspended. School officials have not responded to a request for comment, referring all queries to the Education Ministry. Nayadhango, Christine Ravoy.
Joe Biden is getting on with being president-elect, even if Donald Trump still refuses to concede he lost the election. He's named some old friends as part of his cabinet, including the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, and historic roles for several women. Meanwhile, President Trump has made a now rare appearance to pardon the Thanksgiving turkey named Corn, as the BBC's John Sopel reports.
Corn, I hereby grant you a full pardon.
So Corn lives to fight another day. If only all head-to-head battles connected to the White House were that easy to resolve. The president today sounding defensive.
We send our love to every member of the armed forces and the law enforcement heroes risking their lives to keep America safe, to keep America great, and as I say, America first. Shouldn't go away from that, America first.
But Donald Trump has made the most significant move to accept the result of this election, announcing that the formal transition process could get underway, tweeting, "Our case strongly continues. We will keep up the good fight, and I believe we will prevail. Nevertheless, in the best interests of our country, I'm recommending that Emily and her team do what needs to be done with regard to initial protocols, and have told my team to do the same." The Emily is Emily Murphy, the head of the hitherto obscure General Services Administration, which facilitates the transition of power to Joe Biden. But as more and more key states are certifying their results, last night Michigan, today Pennsylvania and Nevada, Republican leaders have been urging Donald Trump to accept the inevitable, something he's reluctant to do, though legal routes have all but disappeared. Just as President Richard Nixon and Watergate gave us the non-denial denial, so Donald Trump has given us the non-concession concession. He's vowing to fight on, but he's running out of road. And all the time, Joe Biden is taking the steps that will ensure he becomes the president on January the 20th. And Joe Biden is forging ahead, today formally unveiling the people who'll play the key foreign policy and national security roles in his administration.
It's a team that reflects the fact that America is back, ready to lead the world, not retreat from it. Once again, sit at the head of the table, ready to confront our adversaries and not reject our allies.
There has been one unexpected flurry of activity today. With no notice, the president announced he'd be giving a briefing. Would this be the formal concession, the offer of congratulations to Joe Biden? No, Mr. Trump came to take credit for the stock market reaching a record high, and then walked out after just 1 minute.
And that was John Sopel reporting from Washington. In South Korea, most funeral directors are men, but increasingly more women are finding their way into the mortuary industry. It's breaking traditional gender role taboos and responding to a need in the market. Deutsche Welle's Jonathan Crane explains.
Park Bo-ram is a rarity in South Korea. She works as a mortician, an industry traditionally reserved for the country's men. But those traditions are gradually shifting. Park has come to learn that the families of many young female victims prefer that she prepares their bodies.
The biggest cause of death among young people is suicide. Many of them are women, and the bereaved families, especially when the death was due to suicide and the deceased is a woman, feel more comfortable if a female handles the body.
South Korea has the world's highest suicide rate among developed countries. The tragic statistic has been brought into sharp focus after the recent deaths of prominent K-pop artists such as Suli from girl band FX. That's helped break taboos, with more women training to be morticians, determined to counter historic gender stereotypes.
I have heard some shocking things from former students. One of them told me her mother-in-law said, "How dare you think of cooking my meals with the hands that had touched a dead body?" That was so shocking.
For these students majoring in funeral directing, it's about learning to show dignity and respect for the deceased.
I sure wouldn't want a man to touch, wash and dress my naked body, even when I'm dead. I am determined I should be the one bidding these women a proper farewell.
The kind of farewell preferred by many families in today's South Korea.
Deutsche Welle's Jonathan Crane reporting there. The news that Queensland is reopening to travellers from Sydney is barely out, but accommodation prices are already skyrocketing. Travel agents say Queensland hotspots are booking out over Christmas and prices have increased by up to 300%. Meanwhile, Victoria too will reopen to Queensland next Tuesday. The ABC's Annie Guest has this report.
Perfect. So I can just take that payment now.
These Gold Coast-based travel agents are busy for the first time in months.
Just know that when I put you through...
They work for the Ignite travel group. Ryan Thomas is the chief executive.
After the announcement, our phones have gone off the hook.
He says most want bookings on the Gold and Sunshine coasts.
$400 to well over $1,200 a night, depending on your quality of accommodation.
And those same places, if it wasn't so busy?
Yeah, $150 to $400. Just because they've got no inventory left and they're actually making money for the first time in a long time.
And the high prices in southeast Queensland are prompting more bookings in the state's far north, despite the onset of the cyclone and stinger season. But while Queensland is lifting its remaining travel restrictions on New South Wales, the border checkpoints won't be coming down anytime soon. Permits and police checks will continue to stop any travellers from remaining hotspots like South Australia. Restrictions that remain an irritation for some border residents.
It has come at quite a cost to the locals, and it does seem like the border has been more of an issue locally than the virus has.
This GP on the Queensland-New South Wales border, who doesn't want to be named, says residents must update their permits fortnightly online, which is impossible for some elderly residents.
We did have an elderly lady who was being driven home by her daughter. Because she'd been in hospital, she didn't have a pass. She was stopped at the border and required to get a pass on the daughter's mobile phone, but then go and rejoin the queue. So even though she was still ill, still recovering from her illness, trying to get home to rest at home, she had to wait an hour in the road queue. And that's the story that we're getting still.
Have you done this order for the chips and gravy? Yeah, gone through.
Steve Simon owns a seafood shop in Tweed Heads. 850 metres south of the Queensland border.
Most of our customers are coming from Queensland, and obviously no Queensland customers are coming over, mainly because they don't want to go back in the traffic because of the border passes.
He says reopening the border to Sydney-siders is a positive step, but he's uncertain how to plan.
Now that we've got a definite, or hopefully a definitive opening date, we might start putting on more staff for Christmas.
And that report was from the ABC's Annie Guest. A bit of feedback before we head off. A lot of you getting in touch about house prices. Graham says house prices mean the young will not have children or a home and will leave for better conditions. More than one house is greed, he reckons. Another person says first home buyers aren't at auctions because banks won't let them bid without valuations and there isn't enough time. A Devonport local says houses going for $1 million over CV and agents and vendors hugging is nauseating. I get that it's good for me and my house if I ever wanted to sell, but what about the greater good for society? On the elephants, not everyone is sad to see them go from Auckland Zoo. This person says it's great that the zoo is looking after the welfare of the animals and thinking of them. Someone else would like them to go to a reserve in Thailand, saying, I believe that elephants do not belong in New Zealand at all. Assuming these are Asian elephants, I hope they are offered to a nature park in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Don't forget, you can go online and see that piece, some wonderful pictures of the elephants there at Auckland Zoo. They are soon to be gone. First up, we'll have your back from first thing tomorrow morning.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Urgent genome sequencing is underway to help scientists determine where an Air New Zealand crew member got infected with COVID-19. Met Service says most of the wet and wild weather that battered much of the North Island today has passed, but there is still a risk of a return. The US President-elect Joe Biden has introduced key nominees to his cabinet, saying his team will reunite and restore America. State Highway 1 through Mangamuka Gorge in the far north will temporarily open for summer travellers after being closed in July due to slips. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I really want to honour our birth mothers, I think in particular, for having to make those decisions at a time when there was a lot of stigma.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Well, Santa's going to have a great time here. There's a great deal of toys that he's probably dished out over the years to all the kids, and he's got 600 vehicles to play with.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National after the news at 7. A little piece I did outside the studio. I'm taking part in the Citizen Science Project. You could do this as well if you get the right kit, where you go and get a water sample from your local stream. It can be anywhere, but I chose a local stream in the town belt behind where I live, and you filter the water, and anything that's been living in the stream will leave behind traces of DNA. And you send this sample, this filtered sample, off to the lab, and they will tell you what's living in the stream or what's been doing stuff on the stream. Hopefully it's more living rather than doing stuff in the stream. That is my first story after the news at 7. Later on in this hour, we got another report from the House because Parliament's back in business this week. And right now, Jessie Chang has some detail on a trade deal.
I do have to ask, why do trade deals have such ridiculous acronyms?
Well, I'm glad we're starting with the important issues.
Names aren't the only complex thing about trade deals, and New Zealand has just agreed to the largest deal in the world.
New Zealand has signed the RCEP, RCEP, that's the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, along with 14 other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. 15 countries, 8 years in the making, nearly a third of the global population, and about 30% of global GDP. Kia ora, I'm Jessie Chang, and today on The Detail, what is RCEP and what will it actually mean for New Zealand? And didn't we already have a trade deal with the same countries? Something that started off as the TPP but kept changing its name? Why sign up to another one?
In terms of the deal itself, it's not fantastic, and I think
Probably everyone would admit that, even the government, if you talk to ministers privately. It's not as good as it could have been.
And why are trade deals so important anyway?
I think it's been estimated that about 1 in 4 jobs comes from trade. So, it's something that really matters to us.
Trade deals don't make for the sexiest headlines, but they play a big role in how easy it is for us to access products from overseas.
For your listeners, they might be listening on a computer or an iPhone. Obviously, those things are not made here in New Zealand.
That's Stephanie Honey, a former trade negotiator for the New Zealand government who now runs her own trade consulting firm.
The reason that we trade